you. Thank you so much. So I think we all had wonderful dialogue. Um, and so with that said, I'm just going to go right in and start to call on our facilitators. I'm looking for all of the names in the gallery view.
Help you out.
Please and thank you.
Sure. Jan?
I see them. Let's see.
I get so moved by these conversations that and today's going to be particularly challenging for me to summarize because I thought that the sharing was very deep and soulful, and we really stayed on the first section of what's in a name, and we stayed with the name, the first cluster of questions, and we stayed mostly with first names, and so that was the course of the discussion. We had one person who's Polynesian, a mother, and she's changed her name. So, well, she spoke here, evidently. I had missed that talk, but she had shared her story earlier of changing a name that felt more like her from Sarah, which did not feel like her. And that as she's gone on and matured and is doing work in, as she's been in a position to hire people, she's recognizing how names can spur our own biases and prejudices. And that led our discussion around that piece of what's in a name and checking for bias. A gentleman on the call who is from Africa talked about how in his Yoruba culture that a name is so precious and beautiful, and that a family takes 7 days to name a newborn baby. And when he and his American Black wife had their children, a boy and a girl, the American doctors had so much trouble understanding why they took 7 days, but it's so precious and it is so important that the whole family consults on it and they meet and they discuss. And I loved that insight into his culture and the pride and the dignity with which he shared about that. He also brought up a point that we all talked about, is that there are names like Tchaikovsky, Russian names that are in our culture that people don't think twice about articulating and pronouncing correctly. But when we run across a name that has African roots or Indian roots or Mideastern roots or whatever, that we struggle and that the culture can almost feel assaulted or put out to have to try to learn the proper way.
Okay. We're just trying to stay on point with time, Jan.
Thank you. The one last thing was someone who had a name that doesn't present as a culturally anything name, probably most likely white. And when he shows up, he isn't a person who is white. And all that comes from that and is around that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, and so now we're going to go to Natalie.
I had a feeling you were going to come to me.
I'm following the row.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. We had an amazing group. What's in a name, right? There were 4 of us in our breakout room, and we really shared the personal decisions made or experiences that were all tied to the sound of our name and how we expected people to react. There were 2 participants in the group who were moved to action to actually change their public name for 2 very different reasons. The first chose her name when she was a teenager growing up in an area of Chicago where she didn't see a white person until she was a teenager. But she had this internal inferiority complex brewing as she grew up, that if she didn't change her name, she might not get some of the better opportunities once she was ready to, move forward as an adult. Today, she honestly says she's not sure if she gained that much. So in changing her name, she might have given some of her power up, you know, because she selected a name that would have been socially accepted in this country. And we all know what that means, right? Our second participant in the breakout had a name that didn't match what she looked like or sounded like. And growing up, her name was so revered to her. It was so important to her that when she got older, she actually switched her middle name to her first name because it was easier to pronounce. And she didn't want people to mispronounce and misrepresent her name. It was that important to her. But both of them were moved to actually change their names for two very different reasons. Again, admitting to giving up some power and sort of recognizing that, you know what, I don't think I would have lost that much, but there was something in me that made me do that. Our opening speaker was in my breakout room. Boy, was I lucky to have David there. And he really, again, talked about the reverse racial treatment with having a last name that rung very clearly Jewish and not looking Jewish. And the fact that he actually felt more secure and comfortable moving away from a Jewish prosperous neighborhood into the projects. But there was the identification. He could identify with the people around him. As an adult, he continues to see some challenges with the name, but he stays true to who he is. And we know that because we heard him say that. I shared that I myself have had professional experiences as a young professional speaking on the phone with the last name Borneo. At the time, actually, it was Lawson, which is even more European sounding. And I went to meet the client only to then be reassigned from that account the day afterwards. I thought we had an amazing connection and a great day and a great visit, but he was clearly not very comfortable when he put the face with the name. And so I was very embarrassed. And, you know, we all realize that some of these journeys we are on are outside of our control. It's how we react and how we recover and move forward from there. So that's the sharing from our group. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was very insightful. Okay, so next we're going to go to Marie. Marie, you're on mute right now.
Yep.
Okay.
My group was very interesting and very diverse. And many things were brought up about, you know, this one person who, let's see, what is it doing? Okay, I'm muted. Okay, who was raised in a community, had absolutely, you know, no discrimination until she went away to college, and had a grade based on her race, and then she confronted it and just said, you know, I'm not going to shrink from that. I'm going to question what's going on here, and convince the professor that, you know, who I am and what I know. And so I will not experience what I think is racism. And the important thing that came out was how parents help to lead children into being very proud of who they are, about their culture. And it doesn't really, you know, like they are being given the power because of that to stand up for, I am a human being, I am who I am, I may have an accent, but that's perfectly okay, that's who I am. One thing that I've, you know, that was mentioned was the idea of your name being pronounced appropriately, correctly. And how do you approach that? And when someone mispronounces your name, and to boldly say it's this instead of that. And sometimes I think people just, shrink back and just say, oh, whatever. But again, it's to learn that you have to be proud of and to state who you are. And I think that came out very strongly from everyone, is that to be able to say, to know who you are, to accept who you are. Prabhupada said, I'm a human being, I'm a heartbeat, and I'm part of the human race, and I'm proud of it. And I think that that's a really important thing. The second thing was to admit that we do have biases, and honestly make that statement. I know I'm afraid to do that because I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. I really don't want to hurt someone's feelings. But it is true. There are certain biases when you see people, so then you admit it and move on. So it was a wonderful group. Lots of diversity, and I learned something every time. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marie. Francis?
Dr. Cook, you're on mute.
You're on mute. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was saying that our group started out sharing personal experience of individual prejudice in their own life, or that was something they witnessed. One of the participants, shared she grew up in a biracial family with parents, black and white, and there was always a confusion or a difference. And she, that they thought that maybe she was adopted, and there was these assumptions by the look that would be made. Also, that we talked about assumptions by name, and that would cause some misunderstanding. And then also, one shared about images. So there was like he met somebody that was very muscular, a big weightlifter, and he had to really go into himself and say, well, why do I feel prejudiced against this guy? And, and he did the work, and they became very good friends. So, we have these triggers of name, also places. And so people were sharing that. And then one of the members shared that confusion. She grew up in a country where there was a great deal of acceptance of everyone. There wasn't a color discrimination, and then she moved to America, and she found that very confusing. And we talked about that. Another member shared that he's expanded his understanding of where certain names come from, and and he shared his personal life that his parents were a loving couple. Deciding what to name him, and they named him two names. And so the one name was the father's name. The second name was the name that mother chose. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, going second, that the second name would be the name that he was referred to. So it was a way of compromising between two people that loved each other and shared a child. Another that he also shared with us, that names can be a combination of two proper first names of the parents. And so it starts to see that's, coming out of love. But, we tend to find our country or the world, maybe there's a social stratification by names or place. And then we had a discussion about, where does prejudice come from, and it just doesn't appear. And then we use the analogy of the sins of the father as they're passed down 5 generations, and in a kind of a psychological way, we wouldn't say necessarily sins, but maybe prejudice is a sin, but it's a prejudice or a bias that keeps getting passed down unconsciously, and that's where unconscious bias comes from. It doesn't just come out of our food we eat. And we have to struggle to see this shadow part of ourselves. And it stops passing down once somebody does the work of recognizing and accepting the prejudice and bias that has been passed down. And so we hope that we can continue that work with ourselves. So it was a good experience.
That sounds wonderful.
Hmm.
You know, it sounds like we all had somewhat of a similar experience, but different as well. So we had some diversity in our sessions. And I know in my session, we were talking about how names are pronounced and how that can create a plethora of emotions and effects. It can make people feel disrespected based on how their name is pronounced. You know, it can also be an insult if someone calls someone by nickname without permission.
Mm.
So, you know, those are slight microaggressions, we might want to say, when people are insulting you, calling you by a nickname. If your name is Janice and somebody decides to call you Jan, and you have not given them permission to do such. The discomfort, the discrimination we talked about as well with the name. There's so much in a name, how you say it, when you say it, and there's so much that goes into a name. You know, and we also, based on a name, if we go into hiring practices, which was brought up in my group, we have our own unconscious bias, which come to play. And those shape our perceptions and expectations of people. Because if you hear a name and you're on a hiring team, and some of you may have had this experience, you may see someone who's named Christina Vargas, which is a true person. And then I walk into the room. And would you expect me to be a Christina Vargas when I walk into the room? So, you know, oftentimes when I'm training my search committees, I need to tell them that that unconscious bias is something that we all have. We all have it. We discussed it in our groups. And it's something that we have to check at the door every single morning. Bias are created from our backgrounds, our upbringings, our educations, our environment, and they shape and mold our perceptions and expectations of people and of situations and how we're going to respond. An example that we also had with regards to looks are they fell back on childhood situations with some of the people in our group where they were told always dress your best because you'll be treated differently if you don't. You know, we shared the example of if you're going to work, do you look different when you go to work per se as to when you're going to a Home Depot run? And are you treated differently? Of course, I saw that, Natalie. Of course you do. And sometimes we don't want to be recognized, and so we definitely dress differently. So it's very important. Looks are important. You know, people will basically make assumptions based on how you look. Now, I also deal with Title IX on several times a day, and I want to tell you, some of that comes into play. Perception. How did the person look? What did you think of them based on the way they looked? If I sat here silently, and if each of you were silent, and we had to put one word next to your name of what we thought of you and the type of person, the characteristics you may have, it would probably be far from what you really are. It's based on your look. I'm telling you right now, this group is wonderful. If I took up all my makeup, I would look like a different person possibly. So it's just a different concept that we have of one another based on our looks. So, you know, just to summarize it, how do we get past it? You know, those preconceived notions that shape and frame our perceptions and expectations, because they can limit our progress and our growth to knowing one another. So we have to overcome the limitations by not looking at a person through our bias, checking in at the door every morning, knowing that we all have bias because we've had an experience, we've had some type of learning environment that shaped and molded our experience and perceptions and expectations of other people. But we need to recognize that first and foremost, check it at the door every morning, and basically have no expectations sometimes. And look at a person as a human being. Take the opportunity to just know the person. Maybe even coming to the table, not to listen and just by talking or to respond or listen to talk or respond, but to listen for an experience of difference, culture, to learn from different viewpoints and standpoints of an individual. And maybe just, you know, thinking, how would I feel? Some examples I can give you is if you look at a person's political stance, if you say someone is a Democrat or a Republican, Do you have a viewpoint of that person before they even speak? Do we group them all in one box? If there's a salesperson, better yet, that calls your house, do we automatically feel that person's going to be annoying because they're a salesperson? And who knows, it could be something somebody who's selling something you desperately need. But you have to be willing to take the time to learn about each other and understand that people have perceptions of you as well, and ask the question and be open to it. That's going to stop it. It helps us to shape our perceptions, and it's just tuning into our own bias. And that's my summary for today.